Okay, so we're in the beginning of Parshas Miketz, Perek Mem Aleph, Pasuk Aleph. Vayihi Miketz, we spoke about that last week. And now we're going to talk about the next. Going to continue the Pasuk. The Ketz was Shnasayim Yomim. Okay, so what does the word Shnasayim Yomim mean? So, I want to tell you Rabban Rambam and the Ibn Ezra. Rabban Rambam says like this. Shana, says Rabban Rambam, means a lunar year, which has Shin Nun Hey days, 355 days. So, by adding the word Yomim, we mean that the lunar years were filled out and were actually completed with the extra days necessary to make it into a solar year, which is called, a solar year is called Yomim, because the sun is visible by day. So that's why a solar year is called Yomim, all the days. The Ibn Ezra says the same thing, that Yomim means it was a complete year, meaning a solar year. But he says that a solar year is called Yomim because the same exact day repeats itself in terms of the length of the day and the night every solar year, 365 days later. And that's why a solar year is called Yomim. We get back to the same day. So the point is, it was a full 2 years. Okay, so then the question becomes, of course, what's the point of this? Why is this significant? Why is it necessary? Why is it interesting, or part of the story, that it was after a full 2 years lapsed? So I don't know, but I would suggest the following. We spoke about that Paroi is a Melech Zokein, Chsil, Pasuk in Keheles, right? He's the old and foolish king. He becomes old, he forgets that he's born, came from somewhere. And forgetting that leads him to not be aware of the fact that you can lose everything, as we discussed the last year of Parshas Vayeshev. So, and he's exiled. Of course, he becomes foolish as he becomes old. So, Miketz Shnasayim Yomim Parei Cholim. As he gets old, he has the following dream. It follows from the fact that it's Miketz Shnasayim Yomim. But the point about being 2 years can be like this, that 2 years passed, that's indicating that things got old. Because after this Yom Huledes, the same exact thing happened, not once, but twice. And that's when it becomes old. Because it keeps on, it repeated itself subsequently. Also, of course, the Pasuk in Tehillim we talk about that at S10 the time had to come. So there's when the time comes, that's Miketz Shnasayim Yom, and there's the till the time comes when it's not the eights, it's not the kates. And the point of the pasuk is, look, year after year passed, and nothing happened. So in other words, 1 year passing, okay, 1 year passing, every day of the year has its nature, and you missed the opportunity for something, perhaps next time. The fact is that it happens year after year means, okay, it's not the ace yet. Okay, now we also spoke about the Pasuk in Keheles that talks about all the people who join the Yelad Hashem. This is all in Keheles, Perek Daled. Right, in Keheles, Perek Daled, Pasuk Yud Gimel and on, it talks about the young, impoverished, and wise man is better than the old and foolish king who no longer knows how to be careful. because he left the jail to become king and was born in his kingdom in an impoverished way. We spoke about Yosef. And then Pasuk Tesvav there talks about all the living beings who join the second young man, the second Yeled, that stands in his stead. And then talks about Ein Kates, as we spoke about last week. But that pasuk is saying that all the living join the Yeled Hasheni. Everyone joins the second Yeled that replaces the king. So the king gets to be replaced with a Yeled, and everyone goes to the side of the Yeled. Everyone joins him. And that's what happens with Yosef. The king, the Melech Zaken Uxil, doesn't know how to maintain the economy, take care of his country. Yosef does, so everyone, as it were, joins Yosef, right? And Paro says you all have to go to Yosef. Whatever he tells you to do, that's what you have to do. Everyone goes over to Yosef, as it were, from Paro. Okay? And there the pasuk says, the pasuk calls him the Yeled Hasheni. So the Medrash, in fact, says that the Yeled Hasheni is Yosef, and the Medrash connects it to Miketz Shnasayim Yamim. It's called the Yeled Hasheni because he only became king after Shnasayim Yamim. So I would say the pshat is like this. When the pasuk in Kelos calls him a Yeled Hasheni, by calling him the Yeled Hasheni, that indicates that we don't really need him. Right? He's the second. It means he's not another person, he's Yeled Hasheni. There's the Iker and there's the Yeled Hasheni, and that's why he's always at risk of being forgotten. Vayishkachehu and Legadas Yosef. So the Miketz Shnasayim puts him in the position of being the Sheni. The Hainu, he can easily be forgotten about. Year after year can pass when nobody thinks about him. Clearly, despite the fact that Yosef is so important for Mitzrayim, he is also, from a certain perspective, the Yeled Hasheni that no one remembers, as the pasuk talks about there. Gam ha'acharonim lo yismachu v'y, etc. Okay. Okay, there's other psukim about not being remembered. We have to look into that. Okay, now I saw also in the Tzur Hamar, Rav Saba, it says a great pshat. He says if you look at the last pasuk in Parashas Vayeshev, in general, Tzur Hamar has wonderful pshatim, and a lot of times it says things that are similar to what we discussed. I say if I don't own it, but I have to look it up and use it because he really always has great things. Tzur Hamar was the grandfather-in-law of the Beis Yosef. He was from the Megurshei Sfarad. He was born in 1440, I think. Anyway, so the last pasuk in Parashat Vayeshev says that Sahamashkim didn't remember Yosef and he forgot him. So he says that's referring to the 2 years. Because year number 1, V'lo Zachar. Okay, but then when year number 2 rolls around, you might think that he would remember him. No, Kamashmal Vayishkecheu, the double thing. And I would add to that when is he supposed to remember him? When would you think the Sahamashkim should remember him? On the Yom Huledes. And Yosef Vayishkecheu, first Yom Huledes when he comes out, he's supposed to mention Yosef V'lo Zachar. The next Yom Huledes rolls around, Vayishkecheu. The third Yom Huledes rolls around, Miketz Shnasayim Yamim, and this time, Eschatoy Ani Mazgir, he mentions him again. Okay. By the way, another thing that the Tzur Hamar says, we spoke about this in the end of Vayeshev, where Yosef interprets a number of items in a dream as meaning that a certain number of years are going to pass, or days, or a certain amount of time, both in Paro's dream and the Sahamashkim's dream, which suggested to us that Yosef seeing 11 stars would also be something about years, right? So, in fact, the Tzur Hamar says this, but he says, I don't know why it doesn't occur to us. He says 11 stars plus the Sheva Shirech, that's 13. In 13 years, Yosef is going to rise to power, because Yosef was 17 when he was Royas Echad Batzayin, and he was 30 when he came to power. Perfect. So that's the Achadas Kechavim and the Shem Shirech, because items, or maybe perhaps multiple items in a dream refers to time. Okay, so and Pare was dreaming. So you have to read this like this. Before, the Sarim were dreaming, and now Pare is dreaming. And then you could take that contrast a little further. When the Sarim had their dreams, it didn't help Yosef. When Pare has his dream, it helps Yosef. So there's a contrast over here. Okay, you needed Pare to have his dream till Yosef can get his Yeshua. And we're going to talk about that. There's something significant about that. Of course, Pare dreams like as Yosef did about food. And as we shall see, that these dreams are in fact in a way about Yosef and will be beneficial to Yosef, not just because he's going to have the opportunity to interpret them, but they refer to Yosef in a deeper way too. Okay, Vihine, as we'll see soon. Vihine oimed al hayar. So that means that Pare was standing beside the river, like the pasuk says. Allah of Matim Al means adjacent to, and this Radak makes this point. So here it says oimed al hayar, which is like in Pare's repetition. Pasuk Zayin oimed al sfas hayar. Al hayar means next to the river on the sfas hayar. Standing next to the river is important because that's where things grow. And we see in the next pasuk, the cows come out from the river and they graze on the achum. And it's not just that there's place to. Okay, we'll talk about that soon. Why is it significant that things grow on the edge of the river? But that's what the edge of the river banks are where things grow, and that's where the achu is, the reeds. We see this too in Yeshaya. In Yeshaya Perek Yud Tes, there's an oracle, a masa, directed at Mitzrayim. And Yeshaya Perek Yud Tes has many parallels to our Parsha, which we will see later, just to go through that a little bit. But for now, I want to point out to Perek Yud Tes, it's a thing about Mitzrayim, and the river is going to dry up, it says in Pasuk Hey, in Yeshaya. And there it says in Perek Yud Tes Pasuk Zayin that the things that grow al Ya'or, Orois al Ya'or al Pi Ya'or, the things that are misareh, take root. Some say it means the things that grow there will be destroyed. Al Ya'or, al Pi Ya'or. So the things that are al Ya'or or al Pi Ya'or, and all the things that are nizra by the Ya'or will be dried up. And therefore Mitzrayim is going to suffer great calamity. So what I'm showing you is that in Yeshaya we have al Ya'or being synonymous basically with al Pi Ya'or. Because Ya'or has a safa, a lip, or a peh, which means an edge. And things grow there on the Sfasei or Al Piyai or Al Ya'or. And that's all one and the same thing. Similar to in our Parsha where we have Paras Omed Al Hayar, and later that's called the Sfasei Ya'or. The Paras stand Al Sfasei Ya'or, and that's where things are, in fact, growing, as you would expect. So what's the significance of the fact that Paras on the Ya'or? Because that's where the whole wealth of Mitzrayim depends on the Ya'or. And that's you get to the next pasuk. V'hini Yemen Ya'or Oilois Sheva Paras. There are 7 paras that are ascended from the Ya'or. So now we have the idea of the Ya'or being the source of Mitzrayim's wealth, but not just the river being the source of Mitzrayim's wealth, but in a very specific way. The way the river was the source of Mitzrayim's wealth was because the river would be oileh. As it says in Omois Perek Ches, Pasuk Ches. We spoke about this pasuk last week, about the river being oileh, and how it ties into our Parsha. And other places that the Nile River would overflow its banks. So the parais being oilois min hayar is the perfect symbol for the wealth that comes from the river by virtue of the fact that the Ya'or itself is oila. Okay? Sheva parais yifos mara uvriyos basa vatir eno ba'achu. So they grazed. Now, just to show you in the dreams, right? There's 2 dreams, of course. There's the 7 fat cows, 7 skinny cows, 7 fat stalks, and 7 thin ones. And in each case, the 7 thin ones consume the 7 fat ones. But here, we have an additional fact about the cows that we don't have about the stalks, which is that they grazed in the reeds or in the swamp that they ate. So why is it significant that they're eating? So one reading is like this. The cows, the grain stands for the 7 years of grain. How do the 7 fat cows stand for 7 years of what? They stand for 7 years of good growth because vatirena ba'achu. So it's the cows eating and becoming fat because they eat, right? The paras rois don't graze in pasuk gimel. The paras rois consume the paras amar v'abrias. So the fat cows are fat because they're roya in the achu, which means there's going to be plenty of grain, plenty of growth due to the river on the Sfas HaYa'ar. Okay, so that's what the significance of the paras eating. Or another way to read the paras is that paras plow, and after you plow, the grain grows. So first there's cows, and then there's grain. And that Radak says this too, and the Ramban says that that's the point of Yosef saying that for another 5 years it's not going to be Charesh v'Katzir. Charesh is what you do with cows, and then Katzir is the symbolism of course, the Tvua. Okay. Now I want to show you something very interesting, and these points I heard or read rather in a paper that Rav Nachman Levine wrote, where he showed that there's lashonos in this dream narrative that Parah is having, which take us back to Yosef and in fact even to Rachel. Okay, Vatirena ba'achu in the Parah's dream story takes us back to the beginning of last parsha Vayeshev, where it says Yosef was royeh S10. Okay, now he has Yefos Mareh. He sees things that are Yefos Mareh, and the way he describes it later, they are Yefos Toyar. The only 2 individuals who are called Yefei Toyar, Yefei Mareh, or Yefas Toyar and Yefas Mareh, are Rachel and Yosef. And Paris is Sheva Paris Acherois. And Yaakov worked for Sheva Shonim Acherois, for Rachel. Okay? And the Medrash makes the point of Sheva Paris, and Yosef is the Bein Pairos, who's able to be Paiser in a very specific way related to the Paris, the Medrash says. So there are allusions here to Yosef himself. And of course, we spoke about the fact that Yosef was Yefei Toyar Yefei Mareh, even though he didn't eat the lechem, he only ate plants because he's in Mitzrayim, right? Like Daniel would only eat zerainim, and yet Yosef is Yefei Toyar Yefei Mareh, like the paras that are roya in the achu, and they do just fine by munching on the grass that grows in the achu. Similarly, Yosef could be Yefei Toyar Yefei Mareh on a diet of plants. Okay, so then this dream, in a sense, brings us right back to Yosef. And again, Vatirena ba'achu roya S10. So Yosef is in the center of this dream itself. Now, I want to explain to you a little more about this, how this dream is about Yosef himself, and then it will bring us back to Paroi Cholim, the idea that there's this Ramashkim who could have done something about Yosef and didn't until Paroi had his dream, and then this Ramashkim comes back, okay, and brings back Yosef into the picture. So I want to show you that this is really about Yosef. If you look in Eiv Perek Ches, Eiv Perek Ches is Bildad Hashuchi speaking, and what he says is that God doesn't corrupt justice, okay, and then he says like this. Basically, he says everyone gets their just desserts, and we're going to read from Pasuk Ches and on. He says, ask back to the previous generations, and they'll tell you. Now we're up to Pasuk Gimel. They'll tell you that if you have an achu, it can't grow without mayim. If you have grass without a source of water, it will be, it will end up drying out. Okay, so achu needs ya'ar, basically. And then it continues and says, those who forget Hashem, if someone is sheicheach God, he is like the achu that doesn't have water, which eventually will dry out. And then it talks about Yisha'in al Beisai v'lo yamid, he's unreliable. Yachasik boy v'lo yokom, it's unreliable. So someone who is sheicheach kale he can have achu, means he could sprout, but there's no water source. So the mashal is a person's success when he's not rooted on Hashem is ephemeral and unfounded, unrooted, therefore won't last, and is unreliable. Okay, so we're thinking about the Saramashkim who was shecheach and served as, by the way, Mishenes Kone. Remember we spoke about the Yechezkel Paragraph test where Mitzrayim is called the Mishenes Kone Rotzitz. Well, of course they're called the Mishenes of a Kone, of a reed. A reed, because a reed is perfect for Mitzrayim, right? Kone. Yagam Suf. But here the mashal is that reeds need water, and otherwise they're not reliable. Then the pasuk in Yef talks about, contrast that to a tzaddik. Tzaddik is always moist, and if he gets swallowed up, v'chichesh by lo re'isicha, and someone denies the tzaddik and says lo re'isicha, he'll eventually come back. He'll eventually sprout again. Ad yimales chayk picha. Ad yimales chayk picha, of course. Ad yimales chayk pinu, when you get the lechem, right? We spoke about that Yosef and chomim, lechem and chomim, and waiting for the chayk. So the message is like this: the ones who forget Hashem and are mekachesh in the tzaddik, the shecheach and kichesh, and of course we have yesh kacheu and kachash and kates, some lachoshech in the medrash, choshech, kachash and kichesh, and shochach are related. The ones who forget kale, their grass will quickly shrivel. The tzaddik is the only one who, even if he's swallowed up, yival enu, right? Here we have the fat cows were swallowed up. And v'kichesh by lo re'isicha, even if someone denies him and says, I don't know you, even then eventually he'll come back. Okay? So, right, this idea about the river could dry up and the achu will be gone. And we spoke about Yeshaya Perikut Test, where it talks about the river drying up of Mitzrayim. So basically now the message of Paro's dream is that here you have a river, and of course the river has an achu next to it, but you know that the achu has fat cows who feed on the achu, but the whole thing, since the whole thing is based on the river, it's not based on kale. It's shoicheche kale. You forgot God, because vayishkachehu, forgot Yosef, who's like a god. He says, Halal kim pesronim sakurali. Yosef stands in for God, so they forgot God. Forget God, instead you have your river. And this is all a very temporary and ephemeral and unstable kind of system where everything is based on the R, because the R could disappear. Right? And remember it says in Yeval enu mimikaymai, they could swallow him up. So if the cows get swallowed up and the cows were eating from the achu, and the achu grows on the svasa ya'ar, then maybe that suggests that the ya'ar could disappear. That's very scary. This is the danger that Paro's dream presents. And the solution to this problem, the only one who, even if he's swallowed up and even if he's forgotten, will come back, as it says in Eov, is the good guy, is the tzaddik. Hein kelo yimas tam. The tam won't be rejected by Hashem. Okay? So who do we need now? We need Yosef. So when the Saramashkim doesn't just happen to know a good dream interpreter. Saramashkim realizes that we forgot God, and the reason why the river is drying up, the reason why there's this portent of the possibility of the river to dry up, is because that's what happens to those who forget God, and we need someone who is rooted in God, and therefore even if he's swallowed up, will, as the pasuk says in Eif Chaz Ayin Sham, it's all very clear, even if he's swallowed up, will eventually grow again. So Yosef is the cow, right? The Yefais Torah Himar is in fact Yosef, who may be swallowed, may be forgotten, maybe put back into a pit. But he's the one who will eventually sprout again. So the Sar Mashkim really knows two things. First of all, he recognizes that Mitzrayim is in big trouble, and it's all because of him, in a sense, because he wasn't Sheikhech Yosef, and Mitzrayim needs Yosef. So Sar Mashkim is not the hero who happens to have a good connection. The Sar Mashkim did a terrible thing, and that's why the Sar Mashkim says, "Eschatoi ani mazkir hayom," right? Today I'm going to mention my sins. We have to get to that pasuk and understand it well. But one thing to notice, of course, why is he saying that? So yeah, it's derech eretz. Since he's mentioning something evil, he has to preface it and excuse it by saying, "Please excuse me, King. I'm going to mention something that I did wrong." That could be fine if I shouldn't say that, but it's noteworthy that he's saying it's chatoi ani mazkir, and chatoi is plural. What were the plural sins? Parei kotzaf alavadav. That's one. What's the other sin? So some say the sin is that he forgot Yosef. So the Medrash says the sin is that he waited till then. He should have told Pai right away. But according to this, that he forgot, his sin is that he forgot Yosef. He's not merely telling Pai, okay, I'm going to now tell you about a good dream interpreter I know, but I have to bring up something uncomfortable, something that I'd rather not speak about, and it's perhaps not respectful to the king to speak about, but I'm going to excuse myself by saying it's chatoi. That's not what it means. It means Sar Mashkim is taking responsibility. He realizes that, oh no, what have I done? It's his forgetting Yosef. It's vayishkachehu. Forgetting Yosef is forgetting God, and therefore the next thing you know, Paro is oimed al haya'or, and all there is the river, and there's no God, there's just a river, and the river could dry up, and the Achu could go, and the Par could go, and the only way we can get a guaranteed Eichel is finding a tzaddik who's rooted in Hashem, and that's the Parais ben Pairas Yosef, who's Yifei Torah Yifei Mare, and he's Roya es Echov, and he's the one who is going to preserve the wealth no matter what. So the Sar Mashkim realizes, "Oy habich gemacht hatos." I did something very, very evil. It's all his fault, okay? And now I want to bring you to Kehelas Perik Hey. And so we're going to get back to Parei Choylin. So we started with, notice the Sar Mashkim had a dream, didn't help Yosef, but Parei has a dream that helps Yosef. In Kehelas Perik Hey, okay, we spoke a lot about, of course, even tonight we spoke about Perik Dal, we've been speaking about this a lot, but in Kehelas Perik Hey it talks about dreams, how dreams come with many inyan, and there's a ksil b'roiv dvarim, of course the melech zaken ksil, and there it says in pasuk Gimel that when you take a vow to God, don't delay it. Ki in chayfetz baksilim es asher tidar shalem. So I maintain that the Sar Mashkim, who's supposed to repay Yosef, who stands in for Elikim, he was over a Bal Ta'acher, right? And therefore he's a ksil. And then, pasuk Hey, so this confirms it, supports it, not confirms it, but it very much supports it in that following psukim. Al titin es picha lachati es besarecha. Don't put yourself in a position where you have to say, Eschatoi ani mazkir hayom. See, if the Sar Mashkim would have walked out of jail on the Yom Huledes and said, I want to tell you about Yosef, he wouldn't have had to mention any chatoi, right? He wouldn't have had to bring up, because everyone knows he just got out of jail. It's because 2 years later he's bringing up some old sin that he did. He has to be masker his chait, and he's being masker the chait of Bal Ta'acher. I should have told you about Yosef right away. Va'al toima lefnei hamalach kishkagahi lama yiktzef ha'elikim al kalkelecha. Parei kotzaf alavodav. You're raising ketzef upon yourself by being ma'acher your neder. Ki b'roiv hachaloimetz v'havonim udvarim harbe ki es elikim yirah. We need Yosef who's yirah elikim. And then the pasuk says, "Im oishek rosh v'gezel mishpat v'tzedek tir v'amedina." If you see in a country the rosh, the impoverished person, being abused, oishek, and you see the abuse, the gezel of justice and righteousness, so it's a very strange thing. How is it that just people suffer evil? Al tisma ala chefetz. Don't be shocked. Why shouldn't you be shocked? Ki gavoya me'al gavoya shomer ugavoya malehem. Because there's a great hierarchy of officialdom, and the petty officials might sometimes not do their duty, and they might be oishik the rush. Remember, Yosef is the rush. Ki gamba malchusay noilad rush, and sometimes the lower officials in the kingdom might be oishik the rush, and they might not do mishpat v'tzedek. But don't worry, because there's a hierarchy. And eventually it reaches the king. And the king is the one who has to do the mishpat. Now, by the way, the next pasuk talks about the V'yiskun Eretz Bakoil Hu Melech l'Sodeh Neva. The Melech is a slave to the Sodeh. Yosef is going to put the Melech in his place. And Oyev Kesef Lo Yisba Kesef. There's a lack of Sava and there's Kesef. We spoke about those psukim. But back to that pasuk. So the pasuk is like this: don't be shocked that the righteous person suffers and the rush gets abused, because eventually the king, who's the Gavoyim Alehem, he's the highest office, he will eventually write all the Oshek and Gezel that's in the Medina. So that's what's happening in our parsha. The Sarmashkim has a dream, and the Rosh Yosef is Neshak. He doesn't get what he deserves. Shocking. How could that be? Al Tisma. Ki. Eventually it's going to reach the king. That gets back to the ufare. Till now is only the petty sarim. A sar doesn't necessarily do the right thing, but when finally paroi choylem, here the buck stops here, and this is when Yosef is eventually going to be freed. So what happens is, when Pari had a dream, basically Sahamashkim realized that, I messed up, and it's coming back to haunt me. Sahamashkim is not just a good guy here. He's not like, okay, I'm a good guy and I'm going to do Pari a favor, but I'm going to be polite. The Sahamashkim is in big trouble. When he says Chatuani Maskahim, he's really in big trouble. He's in big trouble by raising it, but he's in big trouble if he doesn't raise it, because everything that's happening here is Yosef is coming out of the river to haunt him. The Pari coming out of the river is Yosef's ghost. That the Sahamashkim knows, I am bringing the whole downfall of Mitzrayim because I didn't do what it takes to save Mitzrayim, right? So Gavoyim al Gavoy Hashem Gavoyim Aleim, until it gets to the king, Yosef, who's actually the salvation of Mitzrayim, is not going to be saved, and that's a major problem. And it's all my fault. It's all the Sam Mashkin's fault. Okay, so that's the Parichayim. Okay, and I want to just go to through Yeshaya Perek Yotes, because I want to show you how in fact what the parallels are to Yeshaya Perek Yotes. And it relates to what we're talking about, forgetting God. In Yeshaya Perek Yotes, it talks about Hashem going to be riding on a cloud and come to Mitzrayim, and the Elilim of Mitzrayim are going to be trembling. So, the idea is like this. Hashem rides on a cloud because Hashem controls the rain. The Elilim of Mitzrayim are represented by the river. They don't need clouds, right? So when the river fails them, that's symbolized by Hashem coming on a cloud. And that's, by the way, what Mikamecha Nedar Bakodesh means. I think that Hashem's Nedar, Hashem's Adirim, water, is associated with Adirim, Mayim Adirim, and the Gemara in Sukkah says water is Hydra, of course, creates Hadar. So Hashem is Nedar Bakodesh because his water comes from Kodesh, comes from the heavens. And Michamecha Ba'elim, none of the gods are like him, like the pasuk says over here. He's coming on a cloud, and the Elilim of Mitzrayim are afraid of him. So too in our parsha, the Elilim of Mitzrayim are represented by the Ur because they forgot Hashem. And then it continues and talks about Pare is not going to, the Mitzrim are not going to be able to go to Eitzah, which happens in our parsha where no one could explain the dream to Pare. The river dries up, and as we spoke about the pasuk, the Yaor and Pi HaYaor. And again, the Sarei Tzayan don't know the Eitzah. How could you say Yechacham? Where's Yechachma? You don't know what Hashem has been Yoyetz on Mitzrayim, right? Hashem has a plan for Mitzrayim, and nobody knows it. Noyalu Sarei Tzayan, only, like in our parsha, only Yosef knows it. Okay? And there it ends, it says, and it talks about two more points. It says, Bayomahu Yiyu Chamesh Arim Ba'etzotayim Bedabris Sfas Kenoan. Then eventually there's going to be 5 cities in Mitzrayim that talk the language of Canaan. Of course, we have Yosef who goes out to the land of Mitzrayim and Sfas Le'adati Eshma, and the whole thing about the language. Do they understand the language of Yosef? Do they not? Hameletz Beinoisam. Eventually, in Mitzrayim, they're going to speak the Sfas Canaan, and there the pasuk talks about they're going to know V'noida Hashem leMitzrayim. So Asher lo yoda es Yosef, the forgetting Yosef is forgetting Hashem, is forgetting God, and therefore now Mitzrayim has to be brought down, and the Elilim of Mitzrayim have to be brought down, which is represented by the Yaor, and Hashem's Melucha, of course, is represented by the rain. So, in order for Mitzrayim to get to know Hashem, this is what has to happen. Miketz Shnasayim Yom.